Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you to an evening with the famed American actor, author, activist, and social media superstar, George Takei. I am Bates Gill, the CEO of the United States Studies Center at the University of Sydney, and it is indeed our great pleasure to join with Sydney Ideas and with the United States Department of State and its Consulate General here in Sydney to present this evening's event. The United States Studies Center, which is going to celebrate its 10th birthday next year, was established here at the university with a mandate to raise awareness and understanding about the United States in Australia and around the globe, and with an aim to become one of the world's leading centers for the study of the United States. Now, we do this through a range of activities. We have a number of innovative courses and global experiential learning programs, including study and internships abroad, educating some 1,200 postgraduate, undergraduate, and high school students, both here in Sydney, at the University of Western Australia, and of course in the United States. And I encourage you to have a look at the prospectus, the student's prospectus. Those of you who are here at the university who might want to look at one of our course offerings, take a look at that prospectus, take it with you. We welcome you to join the U.S. Studies Center academic community. We also do this through the kind of path-breaking research which is conducted by our academic faculty and think tank experts on a range of issues about America, issues that matter to Australia and matter to the world. And of course, we do it through an active presence in traditional and social media platforms. And I'm asked to let you know that if you're having any trouble with your 3G, because we're a little bit underground here, please check out the guest access platforms and codes there so you can connect on your Wi-Fi and get active on Twitter or your favorite social media platform. Note here the Twitter hashtags and handles that you might want to use. We also do this through creative collaborations with partners across Australia. Just one example I want to let you know about. We are working with the Seymour Centre, which is the University of Sydney's theatre, right here at the university, and also with the Melbourne-based theatre company Red Stitch. Together, we're going to be co-producing the acclaimed play Grounded by the American playwright George Brant. You may have seen the flyers for this as you came in. Very interesting story. It tells the story of a female Top Gun fighter pilot. I won't tell you why, but she's forced to give up that dream job to become a drone pilot instead, sitting in a kind of mobile home in the middle of the Nevada desert, tasked to track down a high-profile target. And tensions mount as the show explores the professional, personal, and psychological dilemmas that she must go through. The Melbourne production met with rave reviews and was nominated for 5 Green Room Awards. And interestingly, I just noted that the play right now is being performed in New York at the Anspacher Theater, starring none other than Anne Hathaway. Now, our production is going to be starring an Australian actress by the name of Kate Cole. It's going to run from May 1st to 16th at the Seymour Centre right here on campus. And as one critic put it, go see it. The USSC also meets its mandate through public outreach, events like this, where we try to foster an exchange of views between Australia and the United States, often by hosting Americans here in Australia. George Takei is certainly one of those prominent Americans. He is an accomplished actor with hundreds of appearances in feature films, on television, and on stage. A show his life inspired, in which he helped develop, Allegiance, will soon open on Broadway with George in one of the leading roles. He's also an author of best-selling books about his experiences, such as There Goes the Internet and The Internet Strikes Back, and is one of America's, if not the world's, most prolific and widely followed icons on Facebook and in the Twitterverse. George is also active in the American political scene, passionately advocating for Japanese Americans, for U.S.-Japan relations, and for the rights of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender communities in America and around the world. I know we are all looking forward to hearing much more about these and many more important issues from the man himself. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Mr. George Takei. Thank you, sir.
She is a real turn on. She's going to turn me off, moreover. For an American, it's very comfortable to visit Australia because we share so much in common. We share a common language, English, although you speak it with your own distinctive style and panache. But we understand you. And my husband loves the fact that he spotted a Starbucks here. He's addicted to the Starbucks flavor, the coffee. And we also share a common immigrant history. In fact, when I first came to Australia back in the 70s, I was chatting with my Australian friend about our mutual immigrant history. And I said, I visited the Rocks area where Sydney began, and I know that Australia has a convict history. And he very quickly corrected me. He said, Australia does not have a convict history. All the convicts were English. And he is very correct. You Australians don't have that history. But we are people that came from all over the world to build a nation, just like in the United States. I'm the grandson of immigrants that sailed east across the Pacific and built a life in the United States. But Japanese Americans share a singular, unique American history. On December 7th, 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and plunged the world into a second world war. And overnight, Americans of Japanese ancestry were looked on with suspicion and fear and outright hatred simply because we happen to look like the people that bombed Pearl Harbor. My mother was born in Sacramento, California. My father was a San Franciscan, but we looked like the enemy. Despite that hysteria, young Japanese Americans, like all young Americans, rushed to their recruitment centers to volunteer to serve in the military. This act of patriotism was answered with a slap on the face. They were denied military service and categorized as enemy, non-aliens. It was outrageous to call people who were volunteering to fight for your country, possibly even die for your country, as the enemy. It was an insult, but that insult was compounded by the second word, non-alien. Enemy, non-alien. What is that? Non-alien is a citizen defined in the negative. They even took the word citizen away from us. And then shortly after that, the military came down with a curfew on the Japanese American community on the West Coast. We were confined to our homes after 8 p.m. until 6 a.m. And then, shortly after that, we discovered that our bank accounts had been frozen. Our life savings were inaccessible. The money that we needed to meet our daily expenses became inaccessible. And then on February 19, 1942, the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, signed an executive order 9066, which ordered all Japanese Americans to be summarily rounded up with no charges. So therefore, we couldn't have a trial. You need a charge to challenge in a court of law. The central pillar of our justice system, due process, disappeared. We were to be rounded up with no due process and imprisoned in 10 barbed wire prison camps in some of the most god-awful places in the country. The blistering hot desert of Arizona, the sultry swamps of southeastern Arkansas, the cold, windswept wastelands of Wyoming, Idaho, Utah, Colorado, and two of the most desolate places in California. On April 20th, I celebrated my 5th birthday. And a few weeks after that birthday, my parents got me up very early one morning, together with my siblings, my brother a year younger, and my baby sister not even a year old. They dressed us hurriedly, and my brother and I were told to wait in the living room. We both stood by the front window looking out, and we saw 2 American soldiers marching up our driveway, carrying rifles with sharp, shiny bayonets on the end of them. They stomped up the front porch, and they banged on the front door. It was a loud, fisted bang that I still remember. It was frightening. My father answered the door, and literally at gunpoint, we were ordered out of our home. My father gave my brother and me little bundles to carry, and we stepped out and stood in the driveway waiting for my mother to come out. And when she finally emerged from the house, she was carrying our baby sister in one arm, a huge duffel bag in the other, and tears were streaming down her cheek. I was 5 years old then, but I still remember that terrorizing morning. We were taken from our home in Los Angeles and transported 2/3 of the way across the country to the swamps of southeastern Arkansas. I still remember those barbed wire fences that confined us. I remember the tall sentry tower with the machine guns pointed at us. I remember the searchlight that followed me when I made the night runs to the latrine. For my parents, it was an anguishing, painful, humiliating, insulting, shaming experience. But to 5-year-old me, I thought it was kind of nice that they lit the way for me to pee. I was a kid, too young to understand what was going on. Children are amazingly adaptable. What would be grotesquely abnormal in normal times became my routine, normality behind those barbed wire fences. It became normal for me to line up 3 times a day to eat lousy food in a noisy mess hall. It became routine for me to go with my father to bathe in a mass shower. And it became normal for me to go to school in a black tar paper barrack and begin the school day with a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I could see the barbed wire fence and the sentry tower right outside my schoolhouse window as I recited the words, "With liberty and justice for all." Innocent child, unconscious of the irony in those words, just reciting words that the teacher had taught me. A year into imprisonment, the government realized that there was a wartime manpower shortage, And here were all these young people that they could have had in the military, but had accused of being enemy non-aliens. How to tap them. And they came down with another outrage, a loyalty questionnaire. It was a series of questions, but there was one question, question number 28, which was the most insidious of them all. It was one sentence with two opposite ideas. It asked, will you swear your loyalty to the United States of America and forswear your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan? We're Americans, born and raised in the United States. For the government to assume that we had an inborn, organic, genetic loyalty to the emperor was insulting. So if you answered, no, I don't have a loyalty to the emperor to forswear, to set aside, you were saying no to the first part of the very same sentence. Will you swear your loyalty to the United States of America? If you answered yes, meaning I do swear my loyalty to the United States, you were then confessing that you had been loyal to the emperor and now were willing to set that aside, forswear it, and repledge your loyalty to the United States. My parents said, this is outrageous. They took our business, our home, our freedom, and now they want our dignity. I will not grovel before this government. And they answered no to question 28. And for that, they were labeled disloyal. And we had to be transferred to another camp, a higher security camp in Northern California. It had 3 layers of barbed wire fences. There were other young men who said, I'm an American and I will fight for my country, but I will fight as an American. If I can report to my hometown draft board with my family back home, I will fight for my country. But I will not go as an internee, going from behind these barbed wire fences to put on the same uniform as that of the sentries that will be guarding over my family. I will not go leaving them in imprisonment. It was a gutsy, principled, and very American stance. And for that, they were accused of draft evasion, found guilty, and transferred to a federal penitentiary. From a barbed wire internment camp to federal penitentiary, where they did hard time during the Second World War, still maintaining their American position. And I'm proud of them. They are heroic people. And then there's another group of Japanese Americans in the thousands who were desperate to prove their Americanism. They bit the bullet, swallowed their pride, answered that insidious question, number 28, as the government wanted them to, with a yes, essentially confessing that they had been loyal to the emperor. And they went from behind those barbed wire fences, leaving their families in imprisonment. And they were put into a segregated all-Japanese American unit and sent to the battlefields of Europe. The ones that spoke Japanese were sent to the Pacific Theater with the Military Intelligence Service. Those that went to Europe were sent out on the most dangerous missions, used essentially like cannon fodder. But they fought with amazing, incredible courage and fury. They sustained the highest combat casualty per capita of any unit in the entire Second World War. And when the war ended, they returned to the United States as the single most decorated unit of the entire war. 8 presidential unit citations and 21 medals of honor, the highest military recognition the nation can grant. They were greeted back on the White House lawn by President Harry Truman, who said to them, "You fought not only the enemy, but prejudice, and you won." But they also brought back with them a stinging irony. Those that perished on those bloody battlefields in Europe had their coffins covered with the American flag. Those flags were brought back to their widows or their parents, still imprisoned behind American barbed wire fences. Imagine the grief of losing your beloved, and then to be presented with a flag of the country for which they fought that was keeping them in imprisonment. It is a shameful history. But the war ended, and the gates were thrown open. We were free to go wherever in the United States we wanted to. But we were literally penniless. They had taken everything from us. They gave us a one-way ticket to wherever in the U.S. that we wanted to go, and $20. There were many that were so embittered by their experience on the West Coast that they chose to go to the Midwest or to the East, Cleveland, Milwaukee, Chicago, or to the East Coast, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts. My parents decided to go back to Los Angeles, and our first home there was on Skid Row. The hatred was still intense. Skid Row to us kids, and by this time I was 9 years old, was a terrifying experience. We had gotten used to the routine of imprisonment, but Skid Row was utter chaos. The stench of urine everywhere, on the streets, in the hallways, in the alleys. The streets were lined with ugly, smelly, scary people leaning on the walls or staggering about. One came staggering toward us as we were walking down the sidewalk. We froze up, and then he collapsed in front of us and barfed. My baby sister said, "Mama, let's go back home," meaning behind those barbed wire fences, because we had gotten used to imprisonment. Coming out was a terrifying, horrific experience. But my parents were determined to get back on our feet and educate their 3 children. They worked long, hard, killing hours, and they did succeed in giving 3 children the education that they wanted us to have. My sister went to UCLA and became a school teacher, and today she is enjoying her well-earned retirement. My brother went to USC and later to Marquette University in Wisconsin to study dentistry and specialize in oral surgery. And he had a good career of almost a half a century and is also retired and enjoying the fruits of his labor. The other son, me, went to UCLA and UC Berkeley, and he studied theater. He was a black sheep of the family. Boldly went into an area where few Asian Americans go. And I built a career over 6 decades, and this fall, I will be making my Broadway debut in a musical, Allegiance, a musical that we developed that tells the story of the internment of Japanese Americans. So we have a history that has both light and darkness in it. When I was a teenager, I became very curious about my background because I was reading civics books and reading about the shining ideals of our American democracy. All men are created equal, endowed with an inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I couldn't quite reconcile that with what I knew to be my childhood imprisonment. So I engaged my father in after-dinner conversations. And it was from a man who lost everything in the middle of his life, in his 30s, and yet was able to explain our American democracy to me. He said, our democracy is a people's democracy, and it can be as great as a people can be, but it is also as fallible as people are. Our democracy is vitally dependent on people who cherish the shining ideals of our democracy and actively engage in the process. And to illustrate for me how it works, he took me downtown to the Adlai Stevenson for President headquarters. He was the governor of the state of Illinois. He was a great governor and a stirring orator. And at that campaign headquarters, I was exposed to people who passionately were dedicated to seeing Governor Stevenson elected the President of the United States. It was thrilling working in that environment. I stuffed envelopes, made phone calls, leafleted on the street corners. That's the way American politics works. And we were looking forward to that glorious election night when we would be marching to Happy Days Are Here Again. If you know American history, you know that Governor Stevenson did not become president. We failed at that. But nevertheless, my father said, in a democracy and in an American election, you never give up. And so I became involved in a U.S. senatorial campaign, a campaign for governor of California, and all of those efforts came to naught. At last, though, I was involved in the Tom Bradley for mayor of Los Angeles campaign. We worked real hard on that. And on election night, happy days were here then. Tom Bradley was elected mayor of Los Angeles. He became the first and only African-American mayor of Los Angeles, and probably the greatest mayor that Los Angeles has had. He served 5 terms, re-elected 5 times consecutively, 20 years, the only mayor of Los Angeles to serve that long. And after he was elected, he appointed me to the board of directors of the Southern California Rapid Transit District. When the press quizzed him on why he appointed an actor to a public transit board, Mayor Bradley said to them, I've been watching TV, and I've seen George Takei take a group of people from Alpha City 4 to the 4th quadrant. There's no reason why he can't take us from downtown LA to downtown Van Nuys. His mandate to me was to get started on building a subway system because it was desperately needed, and Mayor Bradley had that vision to see LA become a great city, and we did accomplish that. If you should be visiting Los Angeles, do take a ride on our Metro Rail subway system, the newest and the most futuristic of all the subway systems in Los Angeles. All during this time, when I was in public advocacy for politicians, I was also involved in social justice issues. I was inspired by the charismatic leader of the civil rights movement, Dr. Martin Luther King. And I marched with him. I sang at many of the rallies. I met Dr. King, shook his hand, and engaged him in a brief conversation. I was also involved in the peace movement during the Second World War, during the Vietnam War. And when it came time back in the 70s to campaign for an apology from the US government and redress for that unconstitutional imprisonment, I became actively involved in that. And I testified at the Congressional Commission on hearing on the internment of Japanese Americans. And in 1988, President Ronald Reagan, at long last, officially and on behalf of the United States government, apologized for that incarceration and pledged a redress of $20,000. But in our family, the one who suffered the pain and the anguish of the internment the most was my father, who had passed in 1979. He died 9 years too early. He died never knowing that there would be an apology. But that is the way our democracy works. However, during those years, I was silent on the one issue that was organic to me, that was closest to me. From the time I was about 9 or 10, I was beginning to realize that I was different in ways beyond just my Japanese face. The other guys would say things like, Sally's cute. Or Monica, who was blossoming out in full womanhood, they would say, wow, Monica's hot. I thought Sally and Monica were nice. But Bobby. I knew I was different. And I thought I was the only one like that. I couldn't understand why I felt the way I felt. No one else I knew felt that way. And when you're a teenager, you have a great need to be part of a gang, be part of everybody. And when my buddies started to date, I dated too. And I went on double dates with my buddies. But to tell the truth, I was more interested in my buddy than in my date. I knew that I was different. I thought I was the only one. But as I grew older, I discovered that I wasn't the only one. There were others. And they too were putting on a facade like I did. I decided to pursue my passion, an acting career. And I knew that if I were known to be gay, I would not be able to work as an actor. In fact, in those days, back in the 50s, you would not be able to work at any decent job, be it teacher or dentist or whatever area. You could not work. I lived a double life. I pursued an acting career. I got cast. And when I went to press events, a screening, or a Hollywood party, I always had a female friend with me. But after I took her home, I was in a gay bar. For the first time, when I discovered gay bars, I could put my guard down. It's very strenuous, having to maintain that facade. And there in a gay bar, I could relax. I could be wholly me and enjoy camaraderie, friendship with a good mug of beer. It was a double life. But one of the older guys in the gay bar told me something else. He said that occasionally the police would raid gay bars. They would march the client out, put him on paddy wagons, drive him to the police station, fingerprint them, take their pictures, and their names would be put on a list. It was terrorizing. It was bullying by the police. These were people who had done nothing wrong, enjoying relaxation and friendship. And yet, the police made criminals of them. Fingerprinted, photographed, and names put on a list. If that was exposed, they would lose their jobs. They might lose their families. They might lose who they were. It was such an unfair situation. And I began to draw the parallel between the internment of Japanese Americans and the criminalization of gays, lesbians, bisexual, and transgender people. We were innocent during the Second World War, and yet we were harshly punished because of our face, because of what they assumed to be who we were. And the same thing is true for gays and lesbians. They had perception, a priori perception of what gay people and lesbians are like. And so they rounded them up, arrested them, and gave them a criminal record. We live in a society that works on surface perception of people. And yet, our American democracy, my father told me, is a great system. And here I was, campaigning for politicians and campaigning for social justice. It is by active participation in the process of democracy that we build a truer, greater, better democracy. The more I read of our history, the more I came to understand how important active citizen participation in our democracy is. When the nation was founded on shining ideals articulated by our founding fathers, all men are created equal. They were great men, but apparently they took that phrase, all men are created equal, literally. The women in their lives, their mothers, wives, daughters, had no rights. They couldn't vote. They couldn't own property. They had no rights over their own children. But because determined women and fair-minded men challenged and debated and campaigned for equality for women, that today we have women as corporate CEOs. 3 women in the United States have served as United States Secretaries of State, and a woman astronaut led a team of astronauts and went soaring out into space. Active participation for a truer definition of equality is what brought that about. When our nation was founded by these great men who articulated our ideals, they kept other human beings as slaves. But because those slaves hungered for freedom and justice, and they struggled for it, and because their children and their grandchildren and the generations that followed maintained that struggle, that a bloody, horrible civil war was fought, and slavery was eliminated. But racism still existed. During the Jim Crow years, there was segregation. Segregation in education, in housing, even access to public accommodations. the lunch counters. And so the civil rights movement began, inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King. And because of that kind of active participation in our democracy, today we have the descendants of slaves in the halls of Congress as legislators, as lawmakers. And at the opposite end of Pennsylvania Avenue, in the White House, we have an African American as a president of the United States. We have made great advances, but we have work still to do because we still have voter suppression, an effort to suppress voting by African Americans. 50 years after President Lyndon Johnson signed the voting rights bill, we still have issues of policemen shooting and killing unarmed young African Americans. The name of the city, Ferguson, has become iconic. We have made great progress, but we have work yet to do. Our democracy is a dynamic work in progress, and our democracy is made better and truer by those people who actively engaged in the process of expanding justice and equality to more and more people. And I began this talk by talking about the common areas that we share as Americans and as Australians. We share a common politics. You are a democratic country as we are. And I hope that our struggles can serve as some kind of object lesson, and that Australia too will become an even truer democracy. Thank you very much.
You need the left hand 20 second now. I'm going to move it.
Okay, great. Thank you, George.
Thank you. This one here.
Thank you. Thank you so much, George. We're all inspired, encouraged, and so appreciative to hear this remarkable story and the words that you've shared with us about your experience, and implicit in that message, encouraging us all to learn these object lessons and to recognize that in spite of such challenges, great things come through. I wanted to ask you, George, you travel all over the world. You speak to audiences like this everywhere. You speak to them in person, you speak to them across cyberspace. I think you are unique, I suppose, in many respects to understand or to have a feel for whether or not what you're asking us to do, what you're asking, I think, especially younger persons to do, persons who, early in life, who may face some challenges, who may be discouraged, ought to step forward and be active in the best way they can through the political process. In these decades of experience where you've been pursuing that goal yourself, do you find today that there are greater obstacles, greater challenges, greater diversions, distractions, greater discouragement on the part of younger persons to want to take up these ideals and these actions as you've just encouraged them to do? Or do you feel that the circumstances, in fact, are far more conducive? That if anything, activism is greater today than what you remember?
Each generation, I think, has its own challenges. Back in the 60s, we had all these other challenges, the Cold War, the Vietnam War, the Civil Rights Movement. And this generation, too, has now the issue of terrorism, Sydney experienced that. Of all places, we thought Australia was a place that was pacific and safe. But what was it, a few months ago, was it, when in Martin Place you had that act of terrorism? Every generation has challenges that I think are as great for that generation. And today we still, as I said, in the United States, we have the residual aspects of racism, the suppression of votes, the police seeing African American young men as a threatening figure, and they go for the gun immediately. You don't have guns, armed policemen here. You do. Oh, well, in England, I was trying to find some kind of contrast, but I know in England there are people police that don't carry guns. I hope that we can rise to these challenge with each generation. And certainly in Australia, the issue of equality for LGBT people is a great challenge.
In some ways, it strikes me that the digital technology, the proliferation of media platforms, that has actually created a greater opportunity for persons who are passionate, who wish to be activists, who want to have an impact, to do so. And some end up making an impact without even meaning to, simply because they might have an iPhone in their hand that can capture an iconic image.
It's a double-edged sword. We have global access to diversity, and we can spread that message. But at the same time, the trolls, as we call them, those haters, they have that same access. So the challenge becomes how to deal with that as well as the problem itself. But I think that what we are able to communicate now is that it is not just the problem of gays, lesbians, bisexual, and transgender people, because we are literally members of the family. I'm the child of straight parents. Every gay and lesbian is a child of straight people. And we're blood kin. It's our family. And why certain parents would put social opprobrium, approval by society, on a higher scale than what the most natural thing is, a parent's love for their child. We're discovering that politicians in the United States, conservative Republicans, when they discover that their progenies are gay or lesbian, they change. Vice President Richard Cheney, when he discovered his daughter was a lesbian, he became very supportive. The senator from Ohio, when he discovered his son was gay, he changed his vote. And so we have to broaden our thinking. Gays and lesbians are literally members of our family. We're blood kin. And so how they can discriminate against your own people, your own family, is to me unfathomable. Corporations now are discovering that LGBT people are great employees that they need to keep. And so now when we had the problems with a law that's called religious freedom law, which is really a veil to disguise discrimination by sincerely religious people. Well, you know, discrimination is not a religious thing. I'm inspired by and impressed by Pope Francis, who went from the Vatican to wash the feet of the non-believers. This is a true spirit of brotherhood, of compassion, of religion.
I take it you're encouraged in spite of these sorts of setbacks, a la what happened in Indiana and is happening in Arkansas. There's been remarkable progress in America in just the past several years, especially on marriage equality.
We have, in 2013, the Supreme Court ruled where each state is entitled to have their equality rule. And so today, we in the United States have 37 states that have marriage equality, which means that 13 states do not have marriage equality. It's a patchwork. But those 37 states constitute 70% of the United States. So we have 70% of the United States that has marriage equality. But when I pledge allegiance to the flag, I pledge allegiance to the United States of America, all 50 states. And I'm looking forward to June this year. Did my mic just go on?
Now it's back, I think.
I'm looking forward to June because the Supreme Court is going to come down with another ruling, which we hope is going to say that the federal government will now endorses marriage equality so that all 50 states in the United States will have marriage equality. Advances in equality come in small increments, sometimes 3 steps forward, 1 step back, but we are making progress. And Australian corporations, too, are starting to recognize that LGBT people are valuable as employees, and they are very, very good as consumers. And
Sure. In preparation for your visit here to the university, we sought online for folks to put forward some issues and questions and sort of prepare themselves. And I wanted to just see if a couple of the folks might be, hopefully they are in the audience. They were made aware that we might be calling on them. Is Kieran O'Connor in the audience somewhere? Kieran, would you like to raise your question for George?
Hi, how are you?
just great, how are you? Good
Fine,
night
thank
to
you for asking. It's probably no secret here that you have an almost cult-like following when, in terms of social media. I was just wondering how much this has helped how you spread your message in terms of social activism. So, or would you say that you've used other strengths from your past or what's happening currently to spread that message? So maybe a role on Star Trek or something like that. So I was just wondering what has helped you spread your social justice message?
Well, I think you use your life experience in everything you do. My use of social media began with my advocacy for Japanese American equality. My mission in life has been to raise the awareness of the internment of Japanese Americans. It's an important part of American history that very few Americans still today really know anything about. I'm always surprised by people that I consider well-read, well-informed people that are aghast when I tell them about my childhood imprisonment. And so I've gone on nationwide speaking tours. We founded a museum called the Japanese American National Museum. By institutionalizing the story, we make sure that the story doesn't die with us who experienced it, that it becomes part of American history. But all that is essentially reaching people intellectually, museum exhibits or lectures. The way to really get people to feel that story is via a Broadway musical. Because music has the power to hit you here. Drama hits you here, but musicals can transport you emotionally. And so I came across an enormously gifted composer lyricist. And we began developing a musical on the Japanese-American internment. And we titled it Allegiance. We've been investing a lot of our talent and energy and money into this project. But it's a subject that few people know about still to this day. I had to raise the awareness because, you know, it may be theater art, but it's also show business, and we want to make our money back at least. And so my first mission was to raise the awareness, and social media was the perfect way to do that. However, my base was very small and limited to a group of passionate sci-fi geeks and nerds from my Star Trek past. And so I had to grow that. And by trial and error, I discovered that the humorous memes were the ones that got the most likes and shares. And particularly Grumpy Cat, very popular. You just laughed. I mean, that reaches people. And so I started emphasizing that, and the following grew and grew. And once it grew to a certain size, I started introducing serious commentaries on social justice issues and the internment of Japanese Americans and equality for LGBT people, and it grew some more. And so I have 8.5 million followers on Facebook currently.
George, thanks very much. There's one other question I wanted to get to, and then maybe we could open it up to the floor. I think we're joined today by a well-known Australian author by the name of Benjamin Law. Is Benjamin Law here? Benjamin, please.
Hi, Mr. Takei. Thank you so much for making the time this evening. I think everyone here agrees that it's been a wonderful evening. My question to you is, within the world of entertainment, you're often seen as a pioneer and a role model, I think rightly so. And as a pioneer, you've been the first, I guess, one of the first visibly and significant Asian American, specifically Japanese American faces on television, and also later in life as one of the most significant gay faces out there in showbiz. To what extent has being a pioneer been an honour, and to what extent has it been a burden and a challenge?
Well, I think it all comes from what my father said to me, that one has to be actively engaged. It's a participatory democracy, and you have to participate to make democracy real and work for you. And so that sense of engagement is what got me involved in various issues. But as I said, I hid the fact that I'm gay because I wanted my career. But in order to have my career and still do advocacy to make it a better world for LGBT people, that meant taking some risks. And it was a risk for me when I first came out. And that was because there was a landmark event that happened in California. In 2004, in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Supreme Court ruled that marriage equality was constitutional in that state. The year after that, via the judicial route, not the via the legislative route, not the judicial route, as in Massachusetts, the California legislature, both the lower house and the upper house, the Assembly and the Senate, passed the same-sex marriage bill. That went to the governor's desk, and with his signature, it would have become the law of the state. But the governor at that time was a movie star, Arnold Schwarzenegger. When he ran for governor, he ran by saying, "I'm from Hollywood. I've worked with gays and lesbians. Some of my best friends are gays and lesbians." And persuaded by that, some of my gay friends did vote for him. But he's from the right wing of the conservative Republican Party. And when the bill landed on his desk, he played to that base, and he vetoed it. And I was raging at the hypocrisy of that campaign that he led. And we later found out that his sense of morality was not there either. He was carrying on just at that time when he vetoed the marriage equality bill with his housekeeper right under his wife's nose, you know. And I was raging, but I was silent on it. That night, Brad and I, he was with me now, were watching the late night news show, and we saw young people pouring out onto Santa Monica Boulevard, venting their rage against Arnold Schwarzenegger, and we shared that rage. But we were at home watching TV, and that prompted a discussion between Brad and me, and we decided, all right, I've had a good career. Maybe I should throw the dice a little bit and gamble. And I spoke to the press as a gay man, and I blasted Arnold Schwarzenegger's veto. And what I found out, you know, I was prepared to have my career wane, but instead, my career blossomed.
I think there's, we have time. I know you're off to another appointment in just a few minutes' time, but I hope we have a chance to ask from a couple questions from the floor.
Hi, I want to start by thanking you for coming and also offering my condolences for the passing of the late Leonard Nimoy.
Thank you.
The role that really launched your career, in my opinion, was the iconic role of Hikaru Sulu on Star Trek. In that capacity, you would have worked very closely with another late great figure, Gene Roddenberry. His philosophy of social progress can be summed up in, I think, two very poignant examples. I believe it was the first on-screen interracial kiss between Captain Kirk and Nichelle Nichols playing the communications officer, Uhura. And also the story that when asked by a reporter about Captain Picard's baldness, he was asked, by the 24th century, wouldn't they have cured baldness? And he said, in the 24th century, nobody would have cared. Do you think that philosophy rubbed off on you, and to what extent has it influenced your activism?
As you noted, Gene Roddenberry was a true visionary and an optimist. The Starship Enterprise, he said to us, was a metaphor for Starship Earth, and the strength of this starship lay in its diversity coming together and working in concert as a team. Each contributing their best. That was a remarkable vision at a time when all those social issues were happening. The civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, the Cold War. And Gene Roddenberry used science fiction as a metaphor for all these contemporary issues of that time. And for those that were perceptive enough to see beyond the science fiction, they were able to say, oh, that's about Chernobyl. That's about the Soviet Union starting to crumble and needing rapprochement with the Federation. You know, so that made the show that much more engaging. But Gene Roddenberry was walking a very tight rope. That black-white kiss that you referred to, that was one of our lowest rated episodes because many stations in the South, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, refused to air it because of a white man kissing an African-American woman. And therefore, our ratings plummeted. It was important for him to keep the show on the air so that he could continue to address those issues. I suggested to him about the issue of equality for gays and lesbians, and he said, I'd like to do that, but if I did that, I wouldn't have the opportunity to do any other issues because I'd be canceled. And with that black and white kiss, he almost got the show canceled. He was a bold man, and he was a real pioneer.
Thank you, George. I know we have to probably wrap up at this point. Maybe there's one more question. May I ask this woman here too? Sorry.
Hi, given your high social media profile, you mentioned Twitter trolls before. I'm just wondering if you have any pro tips for those of us who are dealing with that.
Protest?
Any pro tips?
Professional tips.
Tips. Grumpy cat.
That's it? Okay. It works for you, right? That leads me maybe to what has to be the last question I want to ask you, George. And if you answer with just grumpy cat, I'm going to be very disappointed. But maybe it's the answer you want to give.
You want to use honey.
You've got this fantastic opportunity coming up on Broadway later this year. I think it opens in November. Anyone who's in New York City, let's promise right now that we're going to go see that show and keep it running when it opens.
Thank you very much for that plug.
It's a fantastic, I know, a real passion for you, and congratulations on that. What a fantastic opportunity to portray what I know is deep in your heart. And let's hope it's a good long run. But, what next? What comes after Allegiance, George? What's going to happen?
Well, we'll organize a road company to travel all through the United States.
To Australia?
Yes, exactly. Because Australia is a great theater country. We just in Sydney, we went to see the Sydney Theatre Company's production of Endgame. And last night, we saw something completely different from Samuel Beckett. We saw the Rocky Horror Show. That'll keep you awake. There's simulated sex on stage.
Let's go. No. George, it's been such a pleasure to have you here. I know I speak for everyone in this room about how happy we are that you're able to spend this amount of time with us, that you've come to Sydney yet again. You're an old-time friend of Australia and of Sydney. We welcome you and Brad again. And most especially, if you can bring Allegiance to Australia, you can count on everyone in this room being there and seeing you in it. We want to wish you the very best of luck. Thanks for inspiring all of us to get out there and make this place a better world. Thank you.